Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. So with that in mind, let's jump right in to this week's episode of Becoming Something.
What's up, podcast world? It's your boy JP in the podcast studio with Nate and Kathy. Finally, because Nate and I've been sitting here wondering where you've been.
I mean, it was the weirdest thing. We have a
sorry.
staff meeting before this. JP and I have been sitting in here, I think, for 15 minutes.
No.
I don't think I'm
Were you-
the
exaggerating.
bathroom
Were you
and
in
had
the-
to refill my
were you in the
Diet
bathroom that
Coke?
whole time?
No.
What did you eat this morning?
Honestly, nightlight donut and Chick-fil-A. That was good.
You had 2 breakfasts? Who would ever do that?
Oh my gosh, you had 3 yesterday. I was worried about you.
I-
He literally went to Magnolia Table,
Yesterday for breakfast, I had a ministry meeting.
the French toast breakfast, which is a lot of food, even though he'll say it's not. Comes to our meeting, and I tell the waitress, "Oh, he's coming from breakfast. Like he doesn't need food." And he gets there, and he's like, "Is it too late to get some breakfast?" And he has an omelet.
Wait, where was that?
Brown House Cafe.
Wait, so you had Mag Table, then an omelet?
That is what I was confused about.
So Kathy goes, "Wow, you went to Magnolia Table and you didn't eat breakfast?" And I'm like, "No, this is just second breakfast."
I was
Oh, my
really worried
goodness.
about you.
Like, why would I say no to an omelet?
Man, it's okay though because you work out a lot.
Exactly.
Hot works.
I mean,
Exactly right.
Have you been working
When-
out? Is that a
so
weird
Michael
question?
Phelps,
when's the last time?
tonal man. Michael Phelps eats like 16,000 calories a
'Cause he
day because he
swims
works out.
so many
I
miles.
feel like it's similar.
Yeah. So when's the last time you did hot yoga?
I actually never, but I went to Hot Works yesterday.
He goes all the time.
That is hot
He's
yoga,
a new
dude.
guy.
That's hot yoga.
I bike and do this.
I know Nate was like, "Hey, make sure that you ask me about Hot Works, so they'll give me a free account." So, I don't know
If
how that
10 of
works.
you sign up, I get free Hot Works. Just mention my name.
Stop.
Oh, you can't say those
Stop.
Oh
things.
man,
You do tonal. You've been working out too, right?
Yeah.
Good for
Yeah.
y'all. I have
he's so
for sure
vain.
not been.
I'm so vain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tonal, man. I'm a big fan. Not sponsored. I wish we were, but no.
I do too. We got to be sponsored by someone. We have enough people who listen now, right? Hey,
I think we're up to 10.
Oh, let's go. 10
There's
people.
11 with your mom.
There we go. Yeah. Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Man.
So-
Hey, today was a big day for one of us.
I know, man. I know it was. Finally got high score on NBA Jam.
The reason Kathy was late is we had this. It is her last week on staff, which is such a relief for so many of
Oh
us.
my gosh, that's not what you
And,
just said.
And anyway, she said everyone wanted to talk to me after our staff
They
meeting.
did. It was very
Shout
sweet.
out John Mark Comer for
That was really
Man.
fine.
doing the goodbye
Did
video.
you cry?
I don't know.
The room was too dark.
I
I
cried
couldn't
a few
see.
times today. What's to say? Who's to say?
Kathy,
I think he has
has a
helped me
spiritual
follow
crush
Jesus,
on John Mark Comer.
just like honestly both of you.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Some more than
he sent
others.
in a video.
I feel like that really waters down the compliment you paid me
Well,
to say right now, both
Aye,
of
that's
you.
true. That's true. You did not
honestly,
say that
I just
earlier.
felt bad because he was across the room. I really meant what I said earlier. but-
Okay. All right.
Man.
Well, he is a person who handles platform well. John Mark is. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today. I read a book, and so I'd love to just have a dialogue with the author. I don't think we've ever pursued an author or anyone for the podcast. Have we ever, other than COVID cold calls, quarantine
think
cold
so.
calls?
No, it's
So
all-
we reached
I don't
out
think
to
we've
her.
ever reached out to someone. Yeah, this is the
We
first time I reached out to someone.
We say no to
Saying-
like.
Oh, come on. You're
Okay,
not trying to
wait.
big
Oh, sorry.
time
Okay,
anybody.
sorry.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Nate's
that's
like,
big
we,
deal.
we
You
don't
really
let
wanna-
anybody
I
on
say
the
no to
podcast.
all you people.
You really want to have this conversation?
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
Because
him
what
too.
I do is they send an email and I check
Yeah.
how many Instagram followers they
Yeah.
have, and
Nate,
if they're
don't
famous,
say this.
Yeah,
You really
stop.
can't say this.
Stop.
It's
So
not
we're gonna
true.
wait. We're gonna invite on Katelyn Beaty, the author of Celebrities for Jesus.
Ooh.
Welcome with me, my new friend Katelyn Beaty. We actually just met yesterday on a phone call. So Katelyn, I read your book, Celebrities for Jesus. I was encouraged by it. It also stirred lots of questions in my head and things I'm navigating. It was recommended to me from someone in my life group. We call them life groups, but my small group here at Harris Creek. And so I read it. I was challenged. I'm a guy that really wants to finish the race. I think I see pastors fall all the time, and I'm like, man, I really want to finish the race. So I thought this would be a good conversation. Can you just tell us about your heart, in writing that book and how that came up? Oh, also, these are my co-hosts, Nate Hilgenkamp and Kathy Davidson.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, Nate and Kathy, nice to meet you too. Yeah, so my heart for this book is really, like you all and so many of your listeners, seeing these headlines about moral failure in the church. I worked at a journalistic publication for years that had to report on some of those stories, and just feeling like I'm tired of seeing the headlines, feeling like I want the church, as someone who loves the church, who's part of the church, to be healthier, to be more grounded, partially to refine our witness to a watching world. And so getting at this dynamic of celebrity is a way of saying, let's look at these roots that we've established. Is there something here that we need to pull up, something that has been intertwined in the American church, in our model of growth, of reaching people, of what we think the pastor is and is called to be and do for us, that we really need to break down so that we can build up in a healthier way. So
Yeah.
I'm coming at this topic not as someone with a paid formal position in the church. I'm very much in some ways an outsider to the specifics of what it looks like to lead a church, but writing, as an observer, as someone who tries to see and bring to light trends so that we can, move forward in a healthier way.
Yeah. The book is Celebrities for Jesus. We're with the author, Katelyn Beaty. You're in New York, is that right?
I'm in New York.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's awesome.
So fun.
And your karaoke is a hobby, I read?
Oh, no.
I shouldn't have put that
Yeah,
in
not
my
with this
bio,
guy.
because
He's gonna make you sing.
people ask me, like, what's your favorite song?
Yeah.
And I have a list on my phone, and I'm not going to pull it up. But yes,
If
I am
you-
known to.
Do you ever
If you want, I
frequent.
could do something.
have you ever done One Sweet Day? Do you know that song at all? Sorry, I never told you.
I mean, it
I
sounds
don't
like
know
maybe
it.
you have.
Yeah.
No, I was ready for you to come in. So I mean, is that really a hobby? Like,
Yes. I mean, I haven't gone as much in the last few years, but absolutely, finding a song that everybody loves to sing along to and knows the lyrics to
It is the
from the
best.
80s and 90s. That's an ultimate
Yes, in the 90s.
endorphin rush for
Yes.
everybody in the room.
And my guilty pleasure in high school was we would go. So I grew up in a small town, 6,000 people in the middle of nowhere, and there was the closest city was about 50,000 people, and it was 30 minutes away. But other than that, then it's like Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Corpus.
50,000 people?
Yeah,
It doesn't feel like that.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Okay, so we would go there on Wednesday nights to Applebee's for
Oh,
karaoke,
that's amazing.
and that was the hang. And so yeah, lots of trouble at Applebee's. But as you think through this, one question I have is how do we define celebrity? Like what determines celebrity?
Yeah, so I define celebrity as social power without proximity. And I think of it as a distinctly modern phenomenon in that celebrity is relying on the tools of media, starting with newspapers and radio and television. And now, of course, we can all become celebrities through social media. But really using those tools to amplify a persona, a kind of charismatic personality that people are drawn to, versus fame, which has always been with us. Fame is an ancient dynamic, but I think with fame, the point is not getting famous. You're doing good work in the world, you're leading well, you're accomplished or creative, people start to take notice, and then you perhaps develop a following from that. But the fame is not the point. It's a byproduct of otherwise good things. Whereas I think of celebrity as really something that is being sought for itself. And I think, there are questions of motive here for all of us. Why am I doing the work that I'm doing? Why am I using social media? What do I hope to gain from this? Is it about myself? Is it about self-glorification and ego and just making a name for myself? Or is it I want to do good work in the world. I want to share it with others. These are the tools that we have at our disposal to share these good works. But I'm okay whether or not I get famous. The point is the work, not the fame itself. So that's how I think that's why celebrity is particularly toxic, is that it can be such a covert form of making it about ourselves rather than about Jesus when we're talking about the church.
Yeah. How do you know? Like, how would you caution us? I mean, three people in the line of work, all of us, I'm happy to share some of my story, but I know I'll vouch for my coworkers, got in this for pure reasons. It was a cost to all of us to get into ministry. But I think just as you do grow in notoriety, people do begin to value your opinion, put you on a pedestal. They want to hear your answers to questions. They affirm, and then it goes even beyond that. It's like, to clothes, sneakers, family, all of the things. How would you caution us or, to keep our motive pure?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one question to ask ourselves, and especially if we see our star rising, and especially if we are getting these opportunities and people want to hear what we have to say, I'm saying this to myself, asking, okay, if God were to take this all away, how would I feel about that? Would I be okay with that? If I could imagine a future in which my calling is taking me into further quiet and solitude and humility and not being noticed or known, would I be okay with that? Would I be okay if God asked me to lead in quiet and ordinary ways rather than big and spectacular ways?
Yeah, that's good. Do you think pastors or ministers of the gospel should be authors or write?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I think it's part of our American consumeristic culture DNA to think that if you have a platform, your church is growing, you have spiritual wisdom to share with others, that you should automatically write a book. And I say this as someone who now works in the Christian book industry.
Which I didn't know when I reached out to you. So just to be clear, so she works for my publisher, the publisher that I'm with. I didn't know that. And I kind of learned that along this. I was sitting with Don, and I was like, "Hey, I just read this book. Have you read it?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I know her." He was like, "You should have her on the podcast." I was like, "Oh man, I'd love to." And so that's kind of how this came to be. But I had no idea. I didn't even know at that moment. I didn't even know you worked for Baker. And so yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. So I think that you have to ask again, why do I want to write a book?
Yeah.
Can I write a book? I hate to say this in terms of like tearing down people's dreams of becoming authors, but not everybody is called to write a book. There are lots of ways. If you are a pastor hoping to share your wisdom and teaching with many more people kind of beyond the scope of your particular church, there are actually lots of avenues for that. And not everybody is called to be a writer. I also think you have to think about, your time invested in the book versus invested in the church. If you use a ghostwriter, I know lots of pastors do. Are you acknowledging that up front? Are you giving credit where credit is due? Is the ghostwriter being compensated fairly, given the advance that you will receive in large part because of your platform and your name recognition?
She speaks about this in detail in Celebrities for Jesus. There's an entire chapter on this. I wanted to ask you a question on that. When you say ghostwriter, because Baker has made a distinction of ghostwriting and like collaborative writing. So when you say ghostwriter, are you including collaborative writing in that? And for me, I think where I wrestle is, like I have a collaborative writer on every book, and have always fought for their name to be on the cover, with one exception, which was just a devotional that was written off of a different book. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, what do you think was unique to you, or which as we're doing this, how much of this do you think is me?" And we had that dialogue, and I think he said somewhere 90%, because there's a threshold that is editing, right? And that's where I was just curious how you thought through all of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I should ask my colleagues at Baker. I mean, we're in different divisions, what they mean by collaborative writer. Truthfully, I don't know if that's like a developmental editor or if that is someone who is doing interviews with you and transcribing the interviews. Like the ideas and the content is yours, but they're doing the work of writing.
Right.
So I'd want to understand from their perspective how they distinguish between that and a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
I think, the baseline principle, and I say this to my colleagues, in the publishing industry at large, we should give credit where credit is due and let consumers and book buyers know where the work is coming from.
Yeah.
And if we feel like, a book will diminish in value, in market value, if we acknowledge that actually this person had help writing this book, are we part of the celebrity problem? Are we essentially saying the person who should get the public praise is only the person with the big name and platform?
Yeah.
Whereas as someone who really does value the work of writing, I want to say let's give credit where credit is due, regardless of who has the big name and who doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
So would you say, is it okay for a pastor to like have a podcast and like why would you maybe be pro that and against writing a book? Is that like a financial thing or
even just to clarify, I was thinking through your answer. Did you say not necessarily, meaning they shouldn't have to, or were you saying no? I really don't think there's ever a good reason for a pastor to write. I wasn't sure the clarification. And by the way, I'm not asking defense. I clearly write. I'm a pastor and I write books. So, and it's like, man, if God doesn't want me to, I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm not asking out of a defensive heart at all. I really am just like intrigued.
Yeah.
You are in a really unique spot. I mean, way more unique than I initially realized when I reached out, because I'm like, you work for a Christian publisher, and I'm like, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I said not necessarily, let me put it this way. I think the vast majority of pastors are not called to write books.
Sure. I agree
think
with that.
the vast majority of pastors are called to take the time and energy and invest their primary calling into the physical and embodied manifestation of the body of Christ in their particular context.
Yeah.
Because if proximity is the way to counter the temptations of celebrity, the people in front of us should be all of our top priorities.
Yeah.
And there is a whole business and marketing and launch, Jonathan, all the time and energy it takes to launch a book well.
Yeah.
I think all of this additional work can take us away from the people in front of us. And truthfully, it's because some of that external work, whether it's podcasting, writing, national book tour, whatever it is, it's more fun.
Yeah.
It's more fun than ministering to people who are hurting and broken, and some of them annoy us. And their needs are so great, and you feel the drain of that on your spirit. Whereas all of this stuff out here, I think for a lot of us, does something to our hearts where we feel valued, we feel important. It feels good to be on a stage where like thousands of people want to hear what we have to say.
Yeah.
I'm speaking from personal experience. So I would never say no pastor should write a book. And I'm actually grateful for lots of pastors who have taken the time to write books. But I would say the vast majority of pastors are called to focus on their specific embodied context.
Yeah. Which, a collaborative writer is helpful to, in the industry. They come alongside, and I hear you saying you're fighting for credit where credit is due. I 100% agree. And they can say, hey, you do that, and I'm going to help you organize those thoughts and those things that you said and those illustrations into a literary work that I think is going to serve people beyond you. But I want to affirm everything you just said, because it's not just the effort that it takes to launch a book. What happens is someone in New York or someone in LA or someone in Maine or someone in Utah thinks, hey, you're my pastor. And they reach out. And they reach out with this really detailed, 5-page email.
Yep.
And somewhere in that 5-page email is a hidden question. It kind of ends with, so what should I do? And it's like, man, I can't give time, energy, and effort to that. If the book doesn't answer the question, then you've got to go to your local church, to your local pastor, because I'm trying to create a resource that stirs your affections for God. And then to further illustrate that point, I would just say, absolutely. Like my friend, I have a friend who's an itinerant speaker, and I asked him, I said, did you ever consider being a pastor? And he goes, yeah, I just didn't I didn't feel called to it. I find a greater joy, and I was like, of course, though. I mean, in part, staying in nice hotels and going in places and eating nice food, and everyone, like, I can remember giving a message at a conference that people paid $200-300 to be at, plus airfare, plus hotel room. So they paid $1,000 to be there. I give a message. It ends in a standing ovation. They're so grateful, and the line's long. They want to meet you afterwards. And then I came back here, because that was like a Saturday. I came back here and I gave the same message Sunday, and it was like, hey, Pastor, you went a little long this morning. And it was like they got the same message for free,
Right.
and there was no standing ovation, and it was just
Yes.
like, hey, you went long this morning. Can you tighten that up? We need to get our kids in kids ministry. And I was like, man, it is there's a real temptation to say, hey, I want to pursue that, not this. So I would say for the pastor, and we're using that title pastor, not preacher, but the church leader that is writing, they do invite this an added temptation in there, and you talk about that in the book. And I think just like the alluring nature of power. How do you say it? Influence without proximity. Is that what it is?
Yeah, social power without proximity.
Yeah.
The ability to shape hearts and minds, but from a distance, from the stage or the screen.
Yeah.
And in that distance between, speaker, preacher, pastor, and audience or church, I think comes all sorts of temptations. Part of why I wrote this book is because I think celebrity creates such an undue burden on pastors and lots of other spiritual leaders, the sense that now I have to maintain the platform. Now I have to grow it. People expect me to be and do all these things, to wear all these hats. And also at the same time, because I have to keep up this persona, very few people actually know me, so there's an isolating effect to celebrity. And that is a dangerous place for any of us to be in. And we see all these statistics about pastoral burnout and people leaving church ministry. I think some of it is because of the incredible expectations placed on pastors to be a kind of celebrity in the church's midst, to lead the church from glory to glory, to grow, to be flashy and impressive. And that's too much for any of us to bear. And so no wonder people flame out when the people in the pews expect that. So in some ways, I say in the book, this isn't just those guys out there who have fallen problem. This is a problem for all of us who have these expectations for pastors. We're putting them into a type of mold or performance expectation that is not humanly possible to bear for very long.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And I'll say here, I want to hear what you have to ask. I just will insert here, and I acknowledge, I wanted to say this earlier, I'm part of the problem. We've said that on the podcast before I have a social media personality, right? And the greatest compliment that I get from people is, hey, you're the same person on the stage as you're off the stage. You're the same person on Instagram as you are in person. I want to be consistent. I think I'm not bringing a lot of skills to the table. I think the thing
Amen.
Oh my gosh.
I think the thing that the Lord has entrusted to me is transparency. I'm not going to play games. It's kind of what you see is what you get. It's in my head. It's out here. And I want to acknowledge before we go further, the clumsy nature of this conversation is it is a little bit of a therapy session, because I'm wrestling with all these things. That's why I read the book. What were you going to say?
I think that kind of goes into my question. I haven't read the book, but now I'm really intrigued and definitely want to. It seems like you're highlighting a lot of the problems of, being a Christian celebrity or being a pastor and being well known. And I agree that we're part of the problem by putting these people on platforms. But is there any way that you can have a platform or a following? Because I know you didn't seek it out; it just came. Is there a way to do that for Jesus? And how have you seen that go well? What could someone who has influence or how could they use that influence for good? How have you seen that? Is it possible even in your eyes?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it would be weird for me to write a book
Right.
against all platforms and then
Yes.
to try to use a platform to get people to buy the book.
Yeah.
So no, I absolutely think there are healthy approaches to platforms. I think part of what you just said, Jonathan, about consistency between who you are on stage or on screen and who you are behind closed doors or just among people in the break room or whatever is really important. I think, another way of saying that is integrity. That there's an integrated whole self that is showing up in public in a presentation mode, but also is the same essential person behind closed doors. That someone has done the work internally and spiritually to pursue that integration within their walk in the Lord. That's part of it. Accountability. I know that's a word that we all of course know we should all be accountable. It's harder to practice than to give lip service to.
Totally.
So, there have been a handful of times in my own life where I've put something on social media where someone has said hey, I think you could have worded that differently. Or is that what you want to say right now? And I don't like it in the moment, right? It never feels good to have somebody question your decisions, or you think of course, in your mind, you think you're doing things right. But are there actually people in your life who can reflect on how you use your platform to say, I see in the ways that this is beneficial. I see that this helps you, share a message or an idea that benefits other people. And I also see the ways that you're maybe being lured into the more shallow or excessive elements of this. And so just asking, are there people in my life? Do I have friends? So that's what I think we're talking about. Do I have friends who know me much better off the screen and off the stage than whatever I'm presenting to the world? Is there space for them to show up and ask hard questions?
Yeah, and it's been a saving grace in my life. It actually is why your book led to 40 questions that I got. And so I've got, 3 guys, and they're really couples in my life that are asking, how we spend, what we give, what we save, all my search history, what I give my time to, all of those things.
People have access to that?
They do. I think an irony for me is it's the for-profit nature, right? 1 Timothy 6, money is a root of all sorts of evil. Jesus defines leadership as service. Mark 10:45, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as ransom for many. Those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Not so with you. My followers are different. They're servants. And then you get over here, and when you begin to talk about money in the church, that you have an entire chapter dedicated to, hey, check your heart, church leader, because if you're doing it for profit, this is where it gets slimy, and this is where it gets slippery. Which for me, it wasn't the honorarium. It wasn't the, hey, here's $300 to speak at this D now. It really, that opened the door when I got into writing. And that's where I felt hey, this could be a temptation. Have you read or heard of Embracing Obscurity? It's a book.
I haven't.
Oh man, I commend it to you. And it's one of my favorite books. Again, we're on with Katelyn Beaty, author of Celebrities for Jesus. Another book I read is Embracing Obscurity. It's anonymous, so the author didn't put their name on the cover, to hit home their point. But so my story is quickly, and I'm saying this for a reason. So I was in corporate world. The listeners know my story, but was in corporate world, lived in a penthouse condo, all the things that go with that. And the Lord called me to ministry, and I didn't know what that meant. 5 days later, the church called. It wasn't they didn't ask me to come speak. It was set out chairs and make peanuts, And so did that, and it was a beautiful time of really believing in God, and felt like an act of faith. And then, then I got to, years later, got to speak, was affirmed in that gift, then book deals, then speaking more other places. And I told those guys, the accountability, I said, man, I feel like there's a spiritual arrogance welling up in my soul. I feel like, the Lord needs to wrestle me like Jacob. And he did. And then came panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And I ended up in the hospital, and all of that happened. And I read that book in that season, Embracing Obscurity. And so now I'm pastoring a church of 20,000 people, speaking and writing. And there were different opportunities that came, but there was a church in Waco. So we're all in Waco now. And at the time, the first time I taught here was 425 people. And so we moved. So our family moved here, and it felt like, to me, Katelyn, it felt like we were putting that on the altar. And in some ways, the Lord gave it back to me. And so I've always wrestled like, okay, Lord, what does faithfulness look like? And I'm saying all of that to ask you this selfishly, like if you have any advice in that, if you would say, hey, this is, I mean, I want to finish the race. I mean, if you, my accountability partners are listening too, it's like, what is going to help a person finish the race and steward, things like book deals and podcasts and those kinds of things. Or would you say, hey, JP, and it's okay if you would, like, I'd love to hear it. If you say, I think you should delete Instagram. I think you should never write another book. I think this should be the last podcast that you do. And if that's your heart, like I want that counsel.
What if that was my counsel? Like, what would you say?
Well, I would test it. I mean, I would say, man, there's no accident under the sovereignty of God that we're having this conversation. There's irony wrapped all in this. And so I would take that and I would go to the people who know me best, because I know, you don't, no offense, but I would take that to the people who know me the best, who aren't under my spell. Like they have they're not applauding when I walk in a room, and they're over it. And I'm only a burden to them. I mean, honestly, they don't appreciate the Instagram or any of that. And I would say, hey, listen, God raised up a woman in my life who said this. Do you guys agree? And what scriptures speak into that? And I'm certainly, like, in some ways, I have absolutely been intoxicated by the worship of human beings. And I have, and I can also say logically, life would be so much easier if I just had a flock. When I closed my eyes and I dreamed about being a pastor, it was always a church and a field. In fact, my closest friend bought me a painting of just this field with hay bales, because it was never like conferences or book deals. It was always just a church and a field, a flock. Like I feel called to care for a flock. And like I said, the reason I do this other stuff is because I sense that God has asked me to, but I also understand the criticism that sure is convenient,
Yeah, that's a really powerful image, Jonathan. I mean, I can't offer spiritual counsel to you in a super specific way, but I have to believe that image has lingered with you even as this church has grown to 20,000 people, because God has put it on your heart to care for people in your midst. The image of a shepherd and a flock is so intimate, and to care for a flock, a shepherd has to know the sheep.
Right. And
this is not me saying churches should never grow or every church needs to be like 50 people in a field, but I would interrogate that image and ask these accountability people in your life, just like as a thought experiment. What if I went off Instagram? What do you think of that? And just, there's, at this time, I have no, I don't mean to sound relativistic. I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer. It's really about wisdom, cultivating wisdom in a particular season, seeking the wisdom of scripture and the wisdom of trusted friends.
Yeah.
And making decisions based on that. And again, coming back to the sense of, am I willing to let it go?
Yeah.
Like, just imagining that possibility.
Yeah.
In the same way, I imagine that you starting this particular church with 400 people, you thought, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to be faithful with what I have been given. Yeah. Whether it rises or falls, I'm keeping my mind on the pure motive of glorifying Christ and serving people. Yeah. And then it grew, right? Yeah. But ultimately recognizing that's God's providential leading in anybody's life.
Yeah. And just to say this, it was I didn't start it. It's a 144-year-old church in a field. And that, okay. And so I came in on the shoulders of really faithful people. I have asked those guys that, my group that, and I think one would be in the camp of like delete it, and then two would be in the camp of, hey, that would be disobedient. Like, this seems like you've tried to walk away from this. God's multiplied it, give it back. You need to use it for the kingdom. But let's put and this is where your book was helpful. It's somewhat, where, I mean, when I say somewhat, I mean, I did walk away like, okay, but what's the solution? What's the answer?
Mm-hmm.
But we did come up with some questions from the book that are like, hey, let's put these guardrails on to make sure that you stay in the guardrails. I'd love to wrap up just with asking you this question for the listener, though. What's their part? Like, what would you say where they need, they need to do better? Because our listeners are, some of them, their church for them is they're pulling from the buffet of this podcaster and this podcaster and this preacher and this author, and that's their spiritual nourishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we, have all probably benefited from the writing and speaking of people who aren't our pastors. I benefit from that. But coming back to this primary image of a pastor who can know me as a member of the flock, do I relate to that person in a primary or central way as the primary person or a community of people who I am committed to, I'm embedded within, people there truly know me? That is the central call of the Christian life. We're all called to walk in the way of Christ with other people in real embodied ways. And I think the temptation can be to just outsource all of our discipleship to great speakers and writers who kind of cater to our needs, but can never say the hard word. It's not dialogical, right? It's not a conversation. So coming back to that central image of being embedded in a community that is, centered on the person of Christ. What other things can listeners do? I mean, really interrogate how you want your pastor to perform, and really asking, am I hoping that my pastor kind of takes our church from glory to glory and to bigger and better heights? And what is going on in myself that I want that image of success? Is it that I want to be part of something that feels really exciting and passionate, and there's always something new? Would I be content with an image of the Christian life that is more ordinary, that is stable and steadfast? I think we have put way too much emphasis in the American church on growth at all costs. I think a lot of the root problems that we see are the ends justify the means thinking to growth. And I understand the desire to evangelize, to share the gospel, to see more and more people in the church. But there are times when the church is going to be stagnant and is still going to meet and be faithful and, hear the word preached week in and week out. God does not necessarily call every church to be a mega church, and God doesn't call every church to grow in the ways that we hope that it will. So really interrogating those notions of growth and success, and not confusing growth with God's blessing, because I think things can grow in unhealthy ways. Just because there's more people doesn't mean that there is the deep-rooted spiritual growth that I think we want to see at the end of our days. Was I a part of something that was really deeply rooted in the word and in the life of the Spirit? Or was I part of something exciting that maybe grew to great heights, but then crashed and burned, as we see so many of these stories end up? So just embracing that ordinary faithfulness call, I think, is before all of us.
Yeah, it's a good word. Ordinary faithfulness. Set the crosshairs on faithfulness. We talk about that a lot. Hey, Katelyn, thank you so much for your time and expertise for writing this book. Yeah. It truly ministered to me, challenged me, and I'm grateful that you would have this conversation. So thanks for coming on Becoming Something.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great.
All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. To find out more, visit becomingsomething.com.